So I came across this article and I want to share it with you because it really does highlight it really connects the dots for all of the regime change wars that we've experienced since 2000. And I mean, everything is as clear as day. I mean, it's absolutely clear what is going on, and it all comes down to the petrodollar. And we will get into the petrodollar and why it's so important and what would happen if it fully collapsed. I do want to get into that at a later time. Today, I don't want to, but I do want to start connecting some of these regime change war dots. And what's alarming is that when you look at all of the countries that have that we've made our enemy in some way, or we have gone in and overthrown in another way, they all have one really big thing in common. And that is that they decided that they were going to ditch using the American dollar to buy oil. So this great article from Market Slant, and I'm putting the link down below for you to read for yourself. But let's just go over some of the things that they have laid out for us here. So they talk about, back in the day, the dollar was backed by gold, an actual pile of gold that was stored in Fort Knox. And during Nixon's presidency, he decided to get rid of that and say, okay, we're not going to back the U.S. dollar anymore using actual physical gold. We're going to move to a different system. And that system was that now the dollar is basically propped up by, I would call it the oil market. So it's not backed by oil per se. It's not like every dollar is backed by a certain amount of oil. It's not that. It's the oil market that is propping up the dollar. So what happened was we actually struck a deal, and this is important to know. We struck a deal with Saudi Arabia that we would provide for them weapons and we would provide for them security, military security, in exchange for them to buy and sell, make sure that the buying and selling of oil was done in American dollars. Doing this made the dollar extremely strong, and it made the dollar in high demand. Everybody in the world who didn't have an oil reserve of their own would be required, which is the vast majority of the world, would be required to buy and sell oil using the American dollar, which means that these nations needed to get their hands on the American dollar. That made the dollar high demand. It made the dollar very, very valuable. Like I said, that's a whole different story that we're going to get into later of what happens if the dollar is devalued. I'm sure you can imagine, but that is a different topic for another day that I don't want to explore. Right now, I just want to get into connecting these regime change war dots. So, in essence, the deal was the U.S. would agree to military sales and defense of Saudi Arabia, it says here, in return for all oil trade being done in U.S. dollars. So, the relationship between oil and currency gives the dollar its value, and that is the essential thing to know. One by one, certain nations started to say, we don't like this deal. And we don't want to have to acquire American dollars, which cost maybe a lot out of our currency because they have to do an exchange. And maybe the exchange rate is really ridiculous for a particular nation. And it's causing them to spend a lot more on the oil than they normally would because they first have to take their currency, turn it into U.S. dollars, and then they can buy oil. And that can be very, very expensive for a nation. So especially if they're like, why can't I just buy the oil using my own currency? Why can't I buy oil using gold, gold-backed currency or whatever? So one by one, certain nations started to say, we don't really like this, and we're going to come up with a different solution. Now, some of these nations came up with the solution of using the Chinese yen. Some of them came up with the solution of creating their own currency that would be backed by actual gold again in order to buy and sell oil. Some of them, that was pretty much the two options there. I mean, I think some maybe have said that they would try to use the euro, and that would be maybe something that they could possibly do. Now, the nations, this is where we connect the dots. The nations that said, this is the plan, this is what we're going to do. These nations are, Iraq was the first. Then there was Iran and Libya and Venezuela and China and Russia. And those are the nations. Now, Syria comes into play, but that's a little bit of a different, I want to get into that one here in a second. But let's just think about this. The nations that said, we no longer want to use the U.S. dollar to buy and sell oil. China, Russia, Libya, Iraq, Iran, Venezuela. So it's pretty clear what's happening when you see this list. I mean, it just smacks you in the face what's happening here. There are no other countries that I know of. Maybe there are some more, and you can comment down below or send me an email. Go to my website, KimIverson.com, and tell me about, I could be wrong, tell me some other nations that maybe decide that they were going to drop using the U.S. dollar to buy and sell oil. But this is a pretty alarming list, especially when you think about the nations that we're considering to be our enemy or nations that we want to topple. We did topple Iraq and Libya. Look what we did to them. Iraq in 2000 said that they were no longer going to be using the U.S. dollar. And look what happened to them. That was in 2000. 2000, Iraq says, we're not going to use the U.S. dollar. After 9/11, the country that we decide to march into is Iraq, because we said that they had weapons of mass destruction. Why were we not going after